All right, well, welcome to this Distance Education Strategies and Solutions webinar. It has been a pleasure to work with Todd and Patty from Pro Literacy on the series of distance education support webinars. Today is the fourth installment. Ebony has just given you a rundown of the engagement features. On the next slide, if you want one last glance at that, please do note Ebony's email address if you missed it the first time. Ebony is the person to connect with if you have any technical issues during the webinar. So a few reminders. As always, we will be sharing a recording. Actually, you can see a list here of everything that we'll be sharing out. A copy of the recording, a list of the websites, resources, and key learnings. View copy of the presentation slides, and then a transcript of the chat and Q&A, and then also a certificate of attendance. So the agenda for today is very similar to the previous webinars if you've attended. These are co-hosted by Todd Evans and Patty from from Pro Literacy, and then a team of us from the EdTech Center at World Ed. Today we are very lucky to have Dr. Melissa Helquist from Salt Lake Community College and the Community Writing Center, who will be doing a presentation, I would say like a 30 to 40 minute presentation tops. And then we're going to take some time to answer your questions. If you've been on these calls before, you know that Todd does not leave the webinar until all questions get answered. So that's a highlight of the webinar. Just would like to remind you that you have an opportunity to participate in this type of webinar every fourth Friday. You can go to the next slide, Todd.
Yep.
At 1 Eastern every fourth Friday, and then so the next one will be February 26th. We'll get more information to you after we have confirmed the speaker for that webinar. So without further ado, let's move into the session. Dr. Melissa Helquist is Associate Professor of English and Director of the Salt Lake Community College Community Writing Center. She's a disability study scholar and accessibility advocate. She's received research grants in this area and has done lots of innovative research on disability and multimodal approaches to reading and writing. I came across Melissa's work in actually some promotional materials sent out about an online course that Dr. Helquist had created that focus on integrating accessibility considerations into digital literacy and online learning. This is something we can't afford to ignore in this field and on this topic particularly. So we're really pleased to have Melissa here to share her work. So with that, let's turn the screen share over to Melissa, and I'm looking forward to the presentation.
Melissa, I've stopped sharing, so you should be able to bring up your slides.
Okay, thank you so much. Give me just 1 second. Are you seeing that?
We are. It's in the
yes,
design view. Yes, but we are seeing it.
Great. Okay.
And there we go.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Jen and Todd and Ebony. I'm really happy to be here. Just a couple of notes before I get started. There will be space for me to answer questions at the end of my presentation, but if you have a question, during the presentation, I don't mind being interrupted, so feel free to jump in. But I'll look forward to your questions at the end of my presentation. I know accessibility is a very individualized practice, and the specific concerns you might have for your organization may lead to specific questions, so I'll try to answer those as much as I can. I'll also add my email address is melissa.helquist@slcc.edu. I'm more than happy to respond to questions after today's webinar. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one thing to note about people who do accessibility work, most of us are, well, I should say all of us are very passionate about accessibility work. So any opportunity for me to talk about it is appreciated. So don't hesitate to reach out, with the caveat that it may take me a minute. In addition to work, I'm trying to get my kid through online 5th grade. So that takes a lot of my time. So I won't respond quickly, but I will respond, and I would love to have your questions. Another note, I have some vocal cord paralysis. So as I talk, you may hear my voice kind of degrading, and I may pause now and then to take a drink of water. If at any point you're having a hard time hearing me, just let me know. And just so you don't worry about my voice as I'm talking. Okay, so, and another note, as I go through my slides, for some slides, I'm gonna read through the slide. That tends to not be the approach often. In fact, it's often advice to not read your slides, but for accessibility reasons, I read slides. That's because I want to make sure that I'm providing information in both a visual way and an oral way. And I don't want to make the assumption that the slides are viewable and readable by everyone. So that is why I will be reading some slides. So for my presentation today, I'm just going to talk about kind of a foundation of what disability is, what it means in terms of accessibility, what assistive technology is, just kind of a foundation. For some of you, this may be information that you already know, but I think it's important to have this groundwork. And then once I've kind of talked about the basics, I'll go over some key strategies for working with accessibility in a distance learning situation. And again, as we talk through it, if there are specific things that you want to know about, ask those questions in the Q&A, and then we'll address those at the end of the session, at the end of my presentation. But also if something comes up later as you're looking at the materials, again, please don't hesitate to email me. So the first thing I want to start with is the idea that accessibility is a basic human right. And the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which the US is not currently a signatory to, defines accessibility to information and communication technologies as a basic human right. And so from that document is this quote: "Without technology, basic rights such as access to education and employment and participation in social, cultural, and political aspects of society cannot be realized for persons with disabilities." So this is just to set the importance of accessibility. Shouldn't be an afterthought, it should be central. And then I'm not going to go through each of these statistics, but you can look at them later. But this is just some statistics about disability, and the point I like to make with this is that the slide says 12% of Americans have a disability. That ranges from 12 to 20%, depending on how you look at the information. But that's just to signal that disability affects a lot of people. And as is not surprising, disability connects with access to computers and then links to employment. People with disabilities are less employed and earn less money than people without disabilities. And typically that's not because of ability, that's because of access to resources that make that employment feasible. And so with disability, disability means a lot of different things. But the basic categories are visual, hearing, motor, cognitive, and mental psychiatric. An important thing to note about disability, it's changeable over time and circumstances. So as I mentioned, I have a voice disability. Sometimes I don't sound like I have a disability. Sometimes I do. So if you met me several different times, you might have a different perception of who I am and how my voice works. That's the case with most disabilities. And then just briefly, I want to talk about the social versus medical model. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but the important point I want to make is that disability is often thought of as being within a person. So if you're disabled, you're lacking in some way. The social model of disability seeks to change that and to say the problem is not in the individual, it's in how the world is structured. So just thinking about that as a motivation, that disability can be less of an impairment, less of a challenge if the world is structured in a way that supports people with disability. I'm going to skip over this one because it's just a technical definition of accessibility. And I want to go to what assistive technology is. So this is from IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. And it defines assistive technology as any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, off-the-shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of people with disabilities. And there's a educator and theorist, Sarah Hendren, who says all technology is assistive technology. And I think that's an important idea, that we're all using technology to assist us in some way. Right now, that's even more the case as we use Zoom to do, and other web conferencing to do our work, to go to school, all of those things. We're all using technology to assist us in some way. And then this is just a list of common assistive technologies. These are some that the learners that you work with might use, or some that you might use in your programming to support people. But one I'm guessing that a lot of you are familiar with is a scan and read program like Kurzweil, which just reads text aloud. And then screen reader software is software used by people who are blind or low vision to translate visual content on the screen to audio. And then screen magnification, Zoom text is an example of that. For people with low vision, just to make the text larger. Voice to text software like Dragon that allows people to dictate language, so to do writing through voice rather than through typing or some other means. So those are all software examples. And then hardware examples might be a trackball or a mouse stick, a sip and puff switch. So different ways to engage with a computer or other objects. So instead of using the hand, someone might use a stick that's in their mouth or on their head. So knowing that that hardware is used is important, because we'll talk about how to set up documents and web pages. And a lot of that is to facilitate the use of these assistive technologies. So with assistive technology and accessibility, right now, the technology is pretty well advanced, that there are tools and resources for people who need it, but the challenges in the production of documents and the production of tools. And so that's where accessibility comes in, making sure that content is created in a way that all of these assistive technologies can be optimized. Just gonna grab some water. So, many of you are probably familiar with the Universal Design for Learning. If you want to know more, there's some overlap with accessibility. So it's a good place to explore and do additional research. But Universal Design for Learning really is about flexibility. And these are the three key areas that they talk about. So providing multiple means of engagement. So for example, in a Zoom conference, having chat available, having voice available, just having different ways for people to engage. Multiple means of representation, and then multiple means of action and expression. So, and with representation, if something is presented visually, also presented in text, that sort of thing. And thanks, Jen. Jen just put in the chat a link to UDL guidelines. So with accessibility, there's a lot of overlap there because accessibility is essentially about flexibility, and it's about providing multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression. So giving people multiple ways to be involved and to learn. So in web accessibility and document accessibility, these ideas are represented by the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R. And these guidelines that are on the slide are from the W3C, which is the sort of overarching organization that addresses the web. So if you want to learn more about these, you can search w3.org. But some of this is going to start sounding a little technical, so you don't have to be a web designer to do accessibility. I'm going to try to give you a non-technical version of these. So the P is for perceivable, which just means that there needs to be options for how people take in content. So if you're doing audio content, there needs to be a non-audio version. So that could be sign language, it could be captions, it could be a transcript, just so there's some sort of alternative. And then having text alternatives for any non-text content. So if there's an image, there needs to be a text description of that image. So just multiple ways for people to engage with the content. Operable, this is getting back to what I talked about with different hardware for accessibility, right? So if somebody is not using their hands to engage with a computer, they're going to need the engagement to be simple. And so having content that's accessible by keyboard, one really great way to test this is by tabbing through content. And I'll put in a little bit in the chat a link that can give you some resources for this, but you want to be able to tab through content. If you can do that, then you're off to a great start. So just by hitting tab, you should be able to move from place to place in a document or on a website. Time to use and read content. So one example is, I don't know if any of you use Eventbrite. Eventbrite times out. That's not very accessible, because if you have to use a keyboard and you have maybe some cognitive concerns that might slow you down, that makes engaging with that website difficult. So understandable, just having multiple education levels represented, language options if feasible, and then robust, compatible with assistive technology. Typically, if you've done the pieces previously, you will have content that's robust. So a few tips about kind of building accessibility into distance learning. So one is creating clear and simple instructions. So I love seeing at the beginning of this webinar a few minutes to talk about how to use Zoom, how to ask questions, how to use the chat, right? Not assuming that people know how to use the tools that you're using, but giving people clear instructions to make that happen. Select platforms that are mobile friendly. Lots of people, I teach at a community college. Lots of my students do all of their work on mobile devices. That's very common. So making sure that whatever you're using, people can engage with it on a phone, because that may be all they have access to. And then use clear and consistent layout for materials. Use built-in layouts when possible. So my slides are very minimal. This is an accessibility gesture. You can create more complex documents that are still accessible, but I tend to be a minimalist anyway. So I just use an existing template in PowerPoint, and those built-in layouts, especially in Microsoft Office, have accessibility built into them. So if you're not sure about how to start with accessibility, start with built-in layouts. And then, as I talked about, provide multiple ways for students to learn. Not everyone likes to speak, so give people an option to write. If they're not comfortable with writing, give them a way to engage by voice. Just lots of options so that people can pick what is most feasible for them. And then a lot of this, I'm sure you all already know, right? It's not, accessibility is common sense in a lot of ways, but just scaffolding learning so that people know what they'll be doing. And this, again, happened in this webinar, right? Here's how things are going to proceed. Here's what we're going to do first, and then next, just providing that scaffold. So again, lots of common sense stuff. So for websites, if you have a organizational website, here are a few things to use. You don't have to be an expert web designer to do accessibility. So the first thing is to use structured headings. So start with heading 1. These are basic HTML tags. Then follow up with heading 2, heading 3. Use them in order. The reason this is important is that people who use screen readers, since screen readers are translating text, visual text to audio, it will start from the beginning and read every word. Most of us don't read that way. If we're visual readers, we don't read that way. We jump around, we look for headings, we have some control over how we engage in the text. So screen reader users do this too. Often they'll navigate by heading. And so you want to tag those so that it's easier to navigate. provide alternative text for images. And, you know, after we get through the main section of this, I can provide some examples for this. But just if you have an image, provide a text version of what that image is so that somebody who needs non-visual access has that content. As I mentioned before, test website navigation with the keyboard. And I'll provide a link for a good resource for that. But just, can you get through the content with the tab key, with up and down arrows, or do you need a mouse to access it? And then there's some great web accessibility checkers. And in the Q&A section, I can show you an example of that. But these are just tools where you can put in any website and it can tell you what the errors are so you can start making corrections. And then include captions or transcript for any audio content. So if there's audio content, make sure that you provide a text version. And with documents, so again, I know this is a lot of information all at once, but hopefully we can, in the Q&A section, kind of look at some specific examples. So probably the easiest thing you can do to start creating more accessible content is, if you're creating documents, create them in Word as docx files. Word is, for people who use screen readers, it's the most accessible format. So that's just an easy way to start building in accessibility to what you create. Again, like I mentioned with websites, use structured headings and styles. And then make documents reflowable instead of a fixed layout. And again, I can show you an example of this. But that's just basically, if documents are created in PDF format without a reflow option, if you do any ebook reading, you've probably encountered this, where you get a document where you can't increase the size of the font, so it's more difficult to read. You want to create documents that can grow bigger or smaller depending on the device and depending on the reader. So for somebody, you know, like me, I have old eyes, so I have to increase the font size of everything I read. Reflowable documents make that easier. And then, sorry, I'm gonna go back. Microsoft Word has great accessibility tools and checkers, and so you can use those built-in tools to kind of help you, A, make sure your documents are accessible, and B, you can learn while you're doing it. So, and I can show you quickly how to do that, but if you want to learn more, just search for Microsoft accessibility and you'll get lots of tutorials. Today, my goal is to give you some ideas to start building from. We definitely are not covering everything. So with web conferencing, here are some tips for making web conferences more accessible. One, describe visual content. That's part of why I keep my slides simple, because I don't want to, in the presentation, spend a lot of time describing visual elements. So I keep things simple. But you want to provide some description, so not assuming that people can see what you're sharing. And then provide captions. And thank you so much in the chats. All of these resources are getting posted. Thank you so much, Todd. So provide a transcript. And I've been running, I'll show you in the Q&A, but I've been running Otter while we're talking, so I can show you what that looks like. AI captions are not perfect by any means. So AI captioning transcript is like the base level you can do for accessibility, but it can be a good added feature. If you have someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, then you need to provide something more substantial. A live transcriber, an actual person transcribing, or somebody doing ASL interpretation. And another simple thing you can do is provide shared content in advance. So let people know what you're going to be covering so they can go through the content on their own time and their own speed, or after the fact, just making sure that those materials are shared in another way, not just within the context of the conference. And then social media. I'm gonna not spend a lot of time here. I have a social media guide that if you're interested in, I'm happy to send you. You can just email me and I'm happy to share that. And most of the key principles are the same. So provide text description for images, provide captions for audio. There are a lot of great tools where you can do AI captioning for social media. Use camel case. So that's every time you have a word or two words together, do each word capitalized. The reason is screen readers can read that better because they can distinguish individual words. Use plain language, which as literacy professionals, you probably are very familiar with that. And then every social media platform has different accessibility guidelines. They change all the time because they're still trying to figure it out. So just look for those and use those to kind of direct what you do. Okay, and then I know that all of this can be a lot. So these are some tips for getting started with accessibility. So don't feel like you have to do everything at once. These are the things that I would recommend doing. Draft and share an accessibility statement. Share your accessibility intentions with your clients because you don't have to have everything perfect. People just need to know that you're willing and that you're engaged. And so let people know that you're working on accessibility. Designate someone to be the contact person. So there's somebody who's responsible for all of this. And then start with your primary point of contact. So if most people come to you through a website, focus on website accessibility first. If most people come to you through social media, start there. Just kind of start with where people find you. And focus on new materials first. Don't feel like you have to go back and make everything you've ever created accessible. That's going to make anyone feel overwhelmed and feel like it's impossible. So start where you are, and then as time allows, you can go back. And then be open to feedback. Most people with disabilities are used to having to work through things. So just letting people know that you're willing and open and you want to support them, and then listen to what they say. People with disabilities know best how to make things accessible. Okay, and then I have a couple of slides with resources. These you can look through more fully when you get the copy of the slides. But these are just some tools. There are a lot of really good, easy to use tools to do captioning, to look at websites. One great thing is, one bad but good thing is a lot of colleges have had complaints from the Office of Civil Rights, and most of those colleges, in response, produce really robust training materials about accessibility. So I have on here accessibility at Penn State. That's one example of that. And then another recommendation, as I mentioned, people who do accessibility are very passionate. And so don't feel like you have to know everything yourself. And these are just some resources to connect with experts in your area. So one is accessibility meetups. There are about 60 meetups that focus on accessibility. Reach out to these groups and see if they can come in and talk to you. See if they know anyone who might be wanting to provide some guidance, whatever. Like, really, accessibility people love accessibility. They'll help you out. The other thing is most states have an assistive technology program. So the website there is ataporg.org, kind of redundant, but look there and you can get connections to assistive technology programs where they might be able to lend you hardware or software, or they might be willing to work with an individual who needs support. And then the other recommendation is connect with your local college or university. You're going to find a varying range of things, but a lot of colleges have occupational therapy programs. Students are always doing projects. They might be willing to help you create some assistive technology that's sort of outside of the norm, or check in with disability resource offices and see if they can do anything to help. So don't feel like any of this you're on your own. There are lots of great resources, and accessibility people like to help. So that's the quick version. So now for some questions, anything, and on the screen there's just a picture of a man with headphones and a white cane.
Thank
So
you.
I can tell you more about, or examples you'd like to see.
Thank you, Melissa. This was a great presentation. And just to kind of let folks know, we were kind of trying to post all of the resources that you had on the last couple of slides and the ones you mentioned in the chat room, so people can kind of click on those links that are in the chat and view some of those resources. We do have some questions, and I am going to encourage people, if you have questions for Melissa, to type those into the Q&A. Just to remind you to do that. It helps us track and make sure that everybody's question gets answered. So we do have a question, and I'm going to try to paraphrase this from Renee. So she agrees about accessibility being a basic human right, and wants to know kind of your opinion. Why does everyone not have access to broadband or Wi-Fi in their home? This is a major problem that we're having with needing to tutor from home. So kind of building in that Wi-Fi access as an accessibility issue. She goes on to say, we know what to do about it, but do you agree that like big companies should be providing this for all households in today's day and age? Are strides being made to make this happen? And I know kind of this is important, the accessibility piece for students, having accessibility to, tutoring and teaching, but it's also just kind of recognizing that a lot of the resources that you identified are web-based resources, and the screen readers for testing and all of that are web-based as well. So, not having access to broadband or Wi-Fi kind of impacts that as well. That was my add-on, but if you want to speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's a huge concern. As I mentioned, I teach at a community college, and I had a student last semester who was having a difficult time getting her assignments in because she was quarantining because of COVID, and in her family there was only one computer. So she couldn't access it because she wanted to keep her family safe, right? So it's a huge issue. A couple of things to think about. Designing for accessibility will make things more flexible on mobile devices. Most people have a mobile device. So you can enhance access through designing for mobile. I know that doesn't cover everything because it depends on the type of plan people have. and the amount of time they can use on that device, but it's a good starting point. The other thing you might think about, there's definitely work being done on this, and I don't, if you all know NDIA, I put that in the chat, National Digital Inclusion Alliance. They're a good resource to connect with. A lot of libraries are starting to do digital inclusion work and provide access to devices for people. So kind of looking for those external community resources is a good place to start. But I agree entirely that we need to do better with that, because people can't, right now, some people can't, get groceries or do their job or whatever without access. So, and thanks, Todd, for putting their website in the chat.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And just to remind people that we will, when we follow up, you'll get a follow-up email next week, hopefully Monday. By Tuesday, certainly that'll have the link to this recording. It'll have all of the resources that we've posted into the chat as well. So here's a good one, and this is one that I've kind of wondered about as well, from Rhiannon, is can anybody use accessibility features on a website, or do you need to have some sort of special software? So you talked about like screen readers and things like that, and I've often wondered about this from the perspective of an online course designer is, do I need special software to go back and kind of check the accessibility of it? And then Rhiannon kind of has an additional thing. Can you share, screen share, to demonstrate what this looks like? Like, what does it look like to tab through a website, or to use a screen reader, or just to check the accessibility of something? I think if we are not using that technology, not familiar with that technology, like, we don't know kind of how to start making sure things are usable by that technology.
Yes. So yes and no. Most accessibility tools in some version are available for free. So for instance, with screen readers, you can get a lot of screen readers for free, like Chromevox if you have a Chromebook, or NVDA is an open source screen reader, and that currently is the most used screen reader by screen reader users. So there are definitely free tools that you can use to learn and do more. And then there are also some more high-end ones, like the JAWS screen reader is a couple $1,000. But there are some other things that you can do. So hopefully on my screen, you can see Adobe.
We see an Adobe, it looks like an Adobe PDF.
Yes. And I'm having okay, here we go. So this is one really simple thing that you can do to check accessibility for a PDF document. But under View, there's this option, Read Out Loud. So first you have to activate it, and then you go back to Read Out Loud and just say, read this page only.
Image description tips. Make sure that your image description considers context. The image description should help.
Okay, so that's just an example, but you can do that and you can speed it up if you want. But that's a good way to see the reading order of a PDF document. And I'm in Acrobat Pro, but it's in any Adobe Reader. And so you can get a sense of how things are going to be read, and that order will give you a sense of if it's going to be accessible for a screen reader user. And
okay.
Then, yeah.
And so if a person, a student was reading that document using a screen reader, that's basically what it would be like for them, as they would have the page on the screen, activate their reader, and it would read through just like that?
Yeah, it would be like 20 times as fast, but that basic idea. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you haven't used a screen reader, if you haven't seen someone use a screen reader before, do a search for screen reader demo. And there are lots of videos that show people using one if you want to just get a sense of how it works.
Okay, great. We can do that, and we will kind of post that search in the chat. So let's give folks a little bit more time to ask some more questions. I know I have a question, so I'm going to take advantage of the fact that people are still typing to ask the question that I have. So you mentioned the importance of having alternate text for different images that you might have on the screen. And we talked earlier about the slide design for different slides in this PowerPoint presentation and adding a lot of graphics to kind of make it look pretty. When you're doing those alternate text, is it better to have alternate text for all of the images or just the images that are really important to the content? Like, does it interfere if you have a lot of stuff on the screen visually and you're trying to describe all that? Can that be confusing, or that is what you want to do so that the person has the same kind of experience as someone who's looking at it visually? Was that question?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you want to think about the impact of the images, sorry. So does the image provide actual content or is it just decorative? So if it's decorative, depending on how you're working with the image, you can identify that it's decorative. You can do that in Microsoft Word, for instance. Or you would provide a description if it's meaningful. So I have this image here and I have a description, and it's this image of a piece of artwork. And it's a chair on some wires. This could be used as a decorative image, but it might be meaningful if it's an image about the artwork itself. And so you kind of have to make that decision. But yeah, if it's just decorative, it's better to not provide a description because it does get a little messy. So yeah, just kind of thinking about the role that the image has in the content and what the user would miss if they don't have access to that image.
Okay, we are back with Dr. Melissa Helquist. Our webinar on accessibility basics got interrupted with some technological difficulties, but Dr. Helquist has been gracious enough to come back and answer everyone's questions that did not get answered during the webinar. So I think when we left off, when we were interrupted, you were in the process of answering a question about accessibility on websites. And the question was, can anybody try to use accessibility features on a website, or do you need to have some special software to be able to do that?
So the best accessibility software is typically an additional program, an additional piece of software. But more and more accessibility is being built into programs and browsers. And so there is a lot that you can do without added software. And there are also a lot of open source tools that are available. So a couple of things. Sorry about this. So just a couple of things you might want to try if you're getting started. So one of the best ways to get started with for instance, a screen reader with a tool that reads all of the content on your device is if you have an iPhone working with VoiceOver, because it's already built in, and it's a good way in sort of a smaller scale environment to get to understand how a screen reader works. So if you just go to Apple support, you can look for VoiceOver iPhone guidance, and it's fairly easy to get started with it. It takes a little bit of adjustment because you're doing everything by touch and sound rather than by touch and vision, but that's a good way to start understanding what a screen reader is and how to use it. Another open source screen reader is NVDA. So that is right now the most used screen reader, and it's open source free, and that can be used on any PC. And so that's a good one if you want to learn more too, or if you're working with somebody who would benefit from a screen reader, that's a good place to start because it is free, and a lot of designers are designing for access with NVDA since it's the most used. If you're working with Chromebooks, Chromevox is a screen reader that's embedded in Chromebooks, and it's pretty simple to use. So that's one and I know that a lot of libraries work with Chromebooks, and that's the machine that they lend out. So that's a good place to start working with. So yeah.
And Melissa, I know that there are just general accessibility settings on, your regular PC, computer, or on the browser and things like that. Are those helpful as well? Are they kind of like the embedded pieces that you're talking about with an iPhone or a Chromebook, or would those be helpful as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting with the accessibility features that are built in, and I know a lot of people use accessibility features not knowing their accessibility features. I was talking with someone and they were all excited showing me that they could have large text on their phone, and I'm like, yeah, it's an accessibility feature. So there are lots of those features and that a lot of people don't know about and don't use because you have to take that step back into system settings and look at accessibility. But I know the larger font is one that I use now all of the time because I'm, middle age and my eyesight is going bad. So thinking about those sort of built-in features can be a really good way to start. And most systems have some version of accessibility.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so I'm assuming the best way to learn more about them is to kind of explore those features that you just talked about, the accessibility features on the iPhone or the Chromebook or the PC, and downloading you said the open source NVDA, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so you would recommend people just kind of trying those out and playing around with them to get a sense of how they work?
Yeah, I think if you've never used a screen reader before, the first time you use it, it can be a little bit disorienting. But if you just kind of take it little by little, it becomes pretty familiar. And I use it a lot. For instance, if I'm driving and need to process something, read email or something, or a longer text, I'll use VoiceOver on my phone to read to me. So there are uses that extend beyond accessibility. So I think they're worthwhile getting to know. And one other example I was going to mention is if you're working with Microsoft Office, in Word, there's a read aloud option, and that's under review. And so if you are working with someone who might benefit from hearing text read back to them, that's a really good feature. So, and you can also use dictate. and it works pretty well on Word. There are obviously more sophisticated programs, but Words Dictate functions pretty well. So it's a good way for people who are just developing their literacy to be able to engage with reading and writing with that extra level of input and output. So
Fantastic, fantastic. Great ways to get started. We did have some questions about, can you show us what it's like for someone who's using a screen reader, like be able to demonstrate what that's like from a user perspective? Can I turn the screen over to you and let you kind of show us what that looks like?
sure. So for that, what I'm going to recommend is not me demonstrating. I can demonstrate a little bit, but I'm certainly not an expert screen reader user. But there are lots of really great videos of screen reader users using the screen reader. And I think those are the best demos, because then you have people, A, who are daily users of screen readers, which I'm not, and B, people who are blind or low vision. And so that's what I would recommend. I can pull one up and show that, but it might be worth, just if people are interested, just doing a web search for screen reader demo.
Okay.
And so lots of videos, and I think those are more effective than me demoing.
Okay, why don't we get you to do just a little demo, and then I will do that search and we'll include some of those video demonstrations and the resources that we send out.
Okay.
Will that work?
Yeah,
Great.
that works great. So
I'm going to stop sharing.
And I can send you a few videos that I like.
Oh, that would be great. That would be great.
So let me do, okay, I'm gonna share my screen.
All right, there we go.
Okay, so just a Word document. So
Accessibility shortcuts.
So I am.
Use the tab key to navigate and press space to toggle an option.
Is it displaying the accessibility shortcuts, or is it just?
It's no, it's displaying. I see a text that says Salt Lake Community College considers, and then I heard what appears to be what I would assume to be kind of instructions about how to navigate with the screen reader.
Yeah. So if you want to play, if I'm on a Mac, so I'm using VoiceOver, which is just the built-in screen reader on Mac. And I have a keyboard shortcut set up for it, so you can do that. But you can also go in your system preferences and look for accessibility. And just the first time you try it, you might feel like you're not sure how to turn it off, but so just do a little bit of reading first, I would say, to make sure that you understand your system. So I'm just going to turn VoiceOver on.
VoiceOver speaks descriptions of items on the screen and can be used to control the computer using only your keyboard. If you already know how to use VoiceOver, press the V key now. If you want to learn how to use VoiceOver, press the space bar now.
Okay, so I just let that play because that just demonstrates that it's going to give you a tutorial if you want it.
Okay.
So.
VoiceOver on Word. Page 1 content. Edit text insertion on Word. Salt. Between characters. S and A. 17 visible lines. Salt Lake Community College considers the accessibility of the college's resources for people with disabilities to be a top priority. You are currently on a text area.
So that's just a really quick demo.
Application, accessibility shortcuts, window, accessibility shortcut, Word, document 4, window, page 1 content, edit text insertion on Word, salt, application, voiceover off.
Okay, so I'm just gonna turn it off. But that's like the super most quick demo. And I can show you how it would be on a web page. Let me find one that I like.
And so it's not just reading the text that's on the page, it's also describing the elements on the page. So it mentioned that there's 17 lines and
Exactly.
that your cursor was in between the S and the A on Salt Lake Community College.
Yeah, and so a screen reader, it's going to be different from, like showing the read aloud in Adobe, which is just reading the text on the page. So a screen reader reads the text on the page, but also tells you about the structure. And it's so that the user can engage with the document in a non-visual way and do all of the things that you could do visually. And that's why designing for accessibility is so important, because if the back-end structure is messy, somebody using a screen reader is going to hear all of that messiness.
Right, right. So that's why it's important to have like your tabs cleaned up so things tab properly from one place to the next, and your descriptions of things are in order and things like that.
Right, and I can show you, let's see, where did it go? Okay, so this is WebAIM, webaim.org, which if you are interested in learning more about accessibility, for me, this is a great place to start because they cover everything and they present it in a really clear and in a clear way that's very usable for people who are not accessibility experts. And so I highly recommend it. So I'm going to turn voiceover back on.
Okay.
Accessibility shortcuts, checked.
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks descriptions of items on the screen.
So I need to turn that off.
VoiceOver on Safari, WebAIM, web accessibility in mind, window, WebAIM, web accessibility in mind, web content as keyboard focus. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow.
Okay, so if you were, I leave all of the those bits on to demonstrate to people, and also a reminder for me because I'm not an expert screen reader user. But that's it. With VoiceOver, you'll get kind of those tutorials as you get started. But you can hear the screen reader orienting you on the page. This is the web page. This is where you are. And
search text field, search. You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, type.
So I'm just tabbing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a really good example of how having a clear tabbing structure is helpful, because I can move anywhere I need to on the page just with tabs. With a screen reader, you have some other tricks to work with, but this is kind of like the basic one.
Submit search button. Website address, edit text, content information, wave button. Leaving WebAIM, web accessibility in mind.
So
Entering toolbar. Sidebar button, leaving toolbar. Entering WebAIM, web accessibility in mind, web content. Expanding the potential of the web for people with disability organizations to create accessible content. Link, accessibility training. You are current. WebAIM, accessibility training, web content. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, VoiceOver off.
So, really quick demo.
Yeah.
And most people who use screen readers on a regular basis will listen, at a much faster pace than that.
Wow, because that seemed pretty fast paced. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's slow for people who,
Yeah, that makes sense, because I guess as you are accustomed to using a screen reader, it's like visually scanning the page. You're scanning it in an auditory way, listening for the commands and where you are, and then tabbing around to where you want to, the information is that you want to get to.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that really does, like, having that experience really does help help you think about like how, like you said, how clean your coding is and stuff like that on the back end.
Yep.
Thank you for those demonstrations. Those are great. And absolutely, if there are demo videos that you would recommend, if you'll send those to me, I'll include those in the resources that we send out, because I think people having a good starting point is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that actually the tutorial piece, I think is a good lead into the next question. So the question is, are there tutorials somewhere for learners who want to use these resources but don't know how to use or install these accessibility tools and apps? And so you talk about sending a demo for the screen reader, but let's say they might need some other accessibility tools. Where would you recommend someone going to just really learn what accessibility tools are out there and available and might be helpful to them, um, to kind of a starting point?
Um, so WebAIM is a really good one. It's more focused on web accessibility, but it's useful. If you're using Microsoft Office, going to their accessibility page. So let's see. And again, this is, this is Microsoft. So if you have access to that, they do have a lot of accessibility. But if you just go to, I'll send you the link, but it's just Microsoft accessibility, and they give a lot of examples of what can be done with their
Okay.
tools. Another one, as I mentioned, a lot of universities have some great accessibility resources, and one is it's called Do It, DO/IT. It's at the University of Washington. And they have great resources to kind of let you know what's available. So,
Okay, I've got their website up now. So Disabilities, Opportunities, Internet Working, and Technology is what the
yes.
Do It piece stands for. Okay, great. So we'll include that.
And then, everybody works with different tools, and I would say the range of accessibility features varies widely, but
Okay.
it's getting better in most cases. And so if there's something you like working with, just do a quick web search for that tool and the word accessibility, and you'll find information about the features.
Mm-hmm.
If you're using Chromebooks, they have really good read aloud technology and also dictation technology. So those are really helpful, and those are within, free Google tools.
Okay. And then, so you've talked about a lot about universities, different universities that have good accessibility departments. Are there, like, just in generally in communities, are there agencies or organizations that would be a good contact if I wanted to just kind of find a local organization that was somebody that I might be able to uh, talk to, kind of locally instead of doing a bunch of research online?
Yeah, so starting with, there are a lot of accessibility meetups throughout the country.
Right.
A lot of those are focused on developers, but the reason that I recommend contacting them is just because most people who do accessibility are willing to help out. And then most states also have assistive technology programs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a great place to start, because their reason for being is to help people get access to assistive technology. And that can be software, hardware, a whole range of things. And they're going to have connections to other people doing accessibility work in the community. So I think those two are kind of reliable places to start. If you need specific disability information, you know, contacting organizations that directly address that disability. So National Federation of the Blind, for instance, is a
Right.
good place to start if you want information about screen readers or want to help a client get access to training for screen readers and that sort of thing. So.
Right, right. And, you know, there are a lot of, I think, a lot of folks are thinking about this in terms of, you know, the screen readers and things like that that are helpful for adults who have trouble, you know, decoding, just as a support mechanism to help them with reading. But we also have a lot of adults who come in, you know, especially older adults who might come in with issues around sight and not being able to kind of clearly, you know, see the words on the page and things like that. So knowing that those resources are there in your state and maybe in your local community, I think is helpful. And I think we have at this point kind of addressed all of the remaining questions that we had. They were mostly around just kind of getting a sense of what the different tools are that are out there and available. Um, any kind of thoughts that you have about um, kind of the intersection of accessibility for, especially for online and distance learning and adult literacy work in terms of um, tools that you think are especially relevant as crossover tools or things to look for, especially these days when we are um, doing things virtually or you know, kind of using a lot of online software to deliver instruction, uh, things to look for that make those platforms more accessible to adult education, adult literacy learners?
Yeah, that's a big question. But
It is a big question.
you know,
So I don't you don't have to answer it all at once, but just, you know, a couple of thoughts on that will be fine. That'll get us started.
yeah, I mean, I think kind of starting with that, a universal design for learning framework, and really thinking about delivering content in multiple ways and
Mm-hmm.
giving the people you work with multiple ways to engage back. And so, you know, with video conferencing, making sure to provide information both through sound as you speak, but also through text on the screen so that there's a reinforcement of
Mm-hmm.
ideas and content. I think that's really important. Um, I really like using automated captions. They're not perfect. I use Otter in most of my meetings and work, um, just because it gives another layer of input for people um, who maybe have a hard time concentrating in those virtual environments. So just thinking about multiple ways to engage with people and giving, you know, making sure that people know they can talk or they can chat or whatever it is. And that's just with video conferencing. That's just one example. But just that idea of what are the different ways that people can engage and what are the different ways that I can present information, and making sure that several different options are provided. And I think that makes things a lot better for everyone. And then I think just providing clear guidelines. I think we assume a lot about people's technology access and their technology knowledge. And So just thinking about how to provide that information clearly and simply,
Mhm.
and not assuming knowledge on anyone's behalf. So that's kind of the general. I don't know if you want more specific.
No, I think that's really good, and obviously it's a good, I think, summary for the information that you gave us in your presentation about especially the multiple ways of delivering information and multiple ways of uh, having for students to engage back with the information and with you through oral, through print, through visual representations and clues, through uh, um, the closed captioning. You mentioned that. And I think that's something that resonates with a lot of our teachers anyway. They are
Right.
accustomed to, to recognizing that students learn in different ways and the importance and value of presenting information in different ways to kind of hit on those different learning styles. So it's kind of recognizing the similarity between learning styles, instruction, and accessibility instruction, but I think paying close attention to those additional accessibility issues in terms of how you design your content, how you present it, and how you um, ask for students to participate and engage with that content.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I think that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you so much for setting aside additional time to answer these questions. And we will, for everyone who is listening to the recording and who attended the first part of the workshop, we'll put this on the end and you'll have a complete webinar presentation from Dr. Helquist. You take care, Dr. Helquist. Thank you again so much and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
All righty.